The night was colder than any before, a storm of white fury raging across the valley, burying every sound beneath the endless roar of wind and snow. In the shadow of a frozen mountain, a pack of silver wolves huddled together, their breaths forming small clouds of worry. Their leader, a large she-wolf named Lyra, paced restlessly near the entrance of their den, her golden eyes scanning the blizzard. Her cubs, 4 tiny lives full of warmth and laughter only hours ago, had vanished when the storm began. The snow had swallowed their scent, leaving only emptiness. The pack had searched, howled, and dug through the drifts until their paws bled, but there was nothing left to find. Lyra threw back her head and released a long, sorrowful cry that echoed across the mountains, a sound that cut through the storm like a blade. Far away, hidden in a small cabin made of wood and stone, a man named Eli heard that cry. He was not new to this land. He had lived alone among the peaks for months, studying the stars and the strange, wordless harmony of nature. But that sound, so raw, so full of pain, pierced something deep within him. He had seen that pack before. Months earlier, he had saved one of them from a hunter's trap. And ever since, they had watched him from the trees, neither friend nor foe, but something in between. Tonight, when he heard that cry, he knew what it meant. He grabbed his heavy coat, pulled on his gloves, and stepped out into the storm. The cold bit his face, the wind pushed against him like a wall, but he did not turn back. His flashlight beam flickered weakly in the swirling snow as he searched through the white wilderness, following faint paw prints that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Time seemed to vanish in the storm. The world became only darkness and snow. Hours passed. His legs burned, his fingers went numb, and his vision blurred, but still he searched. Then, just as the storm reached its worst, he stumbled over a half-buried branch. Beneath it, a faint sound, like a whimper. Eli dropped to his knees and brushed away the snow. There they were, 4 tiny cubs huddled together, their fur frozen stiff, their breaths weak but alive. His heart pounded as he gathered them gently into his arms, wrapping them inside his coat. Their warmth seeped into him, fragile but real. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice was almost lost to the wind. He turned back toward the valley, but every step was heavier than the last. The snow rose past his knees. The wind tore at his coat, and his body trembled under the weight of exhaustion. Still, he pressed on, one step after another, guided by instinct more than sight. Somewhere behind the storm, the wolves were waiting, unaware that hope was walking back to them. Lyra sat at the edge of the den, her eyes fixed on the distance. The storm had begun to fade, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence. Then, faintly, she heard it, the slow crunch of footsteps in the snow. The pack tensed. Shadows moved between the trees. A human figure emerged, stumbling, covered in frost from head to toe. Eli's face was pale, his lips blue, but in his arms something small moved. The wolves growled softly, unsure, until a tiny whine broke the air. Lyra froze. She took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat. Eli stopped a few feet away, lowering himself to his knees. He opened his coat, and the cubs' faces appeared, alive, blinking, shivering, but alive. For a moment, time stood still. The wind quieted, the snow slowed, and only the sound of breathing filled the air. Lyra moved closer, her golden eyes wide. She sniffed the air, then touched her nose to one cub, then another. They whimpered softly and pressed against her fur. A tremor ran through her body, and she let out a low, trembling howl, not of grief this time, but of joy. The other wolves joined her, their voices rising together into the cold morning air. Eli smiled faintly, though his strength was nearly gone. He sank into the snow, exhausted, as Lyra stepped closer and brushed her head lightly against his arm in silent gratitude. The storm clouds began to part, and the first light of dawn spilled across the white valley. The wind softened, carrying with it a quiet peace. The wolves gathered their cubs, curling protectively around them, while Eli leaned against a tree, breathing slow and steady. For the first time in days, warmth touched the frozen world again. The pack had wept for their lost cubs, but now they howled for their return, and for the strange, fragile bond between beast and man that had turned the night of loss into a dawn of hope. The dawn came slowly, brushing soft light across the frozen valley where silence reigned after the storm. The snow glittered like crushed glass under the morning sun, and the breath of the wolves rose in quiet clouds. Eli remained where he had fallen, half sitting, half leaning against a snow-covered rock. His coat was stiff with frost, his eyelashes white, but his eyes were still open, watching the pack as if afraid to blink. Lyra stood close to him, her cubs nestled safely against her belly, their tiny breaths forming faint mist in the cold air. The other wolves kept a respectful distance, circling slowly, their instincts torn between caution and something new, understanding. Eli had risked everything for creatures that would have once fled at his scent. It was something the wild could not explain, but somehow accepted. As the morning warmed the edges of the world, Lyra stepped closer, her paws leaving delicate prints in the snow. She pressed her nose gently against Eli's coat, sensing the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. He stirred, blinking slowly, his lips curling into a small, tired smile. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice little more than a breath. The words were meaningless to her, yet something in his tone carried a message she understood. She lowered her head in response, and for a long, quiet moment they stayed like that. Two beings from different worlds, bound by the same fragile spark of care. Eli knew he could not stay out here much longer. His body was freezing, and the cabin was miles away. He looked toward the rising sun, gathering the last of his strength. But when he tried to stand, his legs trembled, and he fell back to his knees. The snow cushioned his fall, soft and silent. Lyra tilted her head, sensing his weakness. Then, without hesitation, she let out a short bark. The pack responded instantly. Two of the larger wolves approached, standing beside Eli as if urging him to move. Confused but touched, Eli smiled faintly and reached out a trembling hand to steady himself on their fur. Step by step, they began to move together, through the melting snow, across the ridges where the wind whispered softly now instead of howling. It was a strange sight, a human limping beside a pack of wolves, the alpha leading the way with her cubs following close behind. The mountains seemed to watch in silence as this unlikely group made their slow journey back. Hours passed and the storm's memory faded into calm. Finally, the small cabin appeared, half buried in snow but still standing strong. The wolves stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching as Eli stumbled toward his door. He turned to face them one last time. The morning light caught in his tired eyes as he looked at Lyra, who stood tall and proud with her cubs. "Go on," he said softly, though his breath came out in visible mist. "You've got them back now." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Lyra stepped forward, her gaze locked on his. She gave a short, low howl, not loud, not fierce, but filled with meaning. It was not a farewell, it was a promise. Eli watched as the pack turned and vanished into the forest, their silver fur blending with the snow until they were gone. The clearing grew quiet again, but something in the air had changed, something unseen yet powerful. Inside, Eli lit his fireplace, the warmth creeping slowly back into his fingers. As the flames danced, he closed his eyes, exhaustion finally taking him. Outside, the forest began to live again. Birds returned to the trees, the river cracked open from the ice, and far away, faint howls echoed. Not cries of loss this time, but songs of life. Days turned to weeks, and the mountains found peace once more. Eli recovered slowly, though his body still carried the memory of that frozen night. Every morning, he would step outside, gaze at the forest edge, and listen. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, he could hear them, the pack's distant call rolling over the snow. It brought a quiet smile to his face every time. Then, one twilight evening, as he sat by his fire, a soft sound came from outside, a light scratch at the door. He opened it to find a single silver-furred cub sitting there, its golden eyes wide and curious. It was older now, stronger, but unmistakable. The cub stepped forward, sniffing his boots before looking up at him, tail flicking. Behind it, in the trees, two faint shapes waited, the mother and another wolf watching silently. Eli knelt, his eyes filled with warmth, and extended his hand. The cub nuzzled it gently before darting back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it came. The wolves melted into the darkness once more, leaving only paw prints in the snow that sparkled beneath the fading sun. Eli stood there a moment longer, his heart full of a peace he couldn't describe. The world was vast, wild, and often cruel, but tonight it felt connected, human and beast, cold and warmth, loss and hope. The pack had wept for their lost cubs, but in saving them, the human had found something too, a bond beyond words, born in the snow, carried by courage, and kept alive by gratitude.